All right. Entertainment. Thank you, Andy Buesser, for joining me here. Hi, I'm Kid. This is my show, and I'm happy to be interviewing some friends of mine. And Andy, I've known for a few years now, and through happenstance, I've learned that Andy studied up under a man named Tom Brown Jr., who I'd been hearing about for some time. This is the author of several books, including today's topic, The Tracker, but also The Search and The Journey and Awakening Spirits. And Andy can tell you more. Andy, would you like to introduce yourself?
My name's Andy, and I, from an early age, very, very early age, probably too early, fell in love with the woods and spent all the time I could there, including in my mind when I should have been listening to the teacher. Daydreamed a lot, just wanted to be outside. And oh gosh, when I was 13, my father began letting my brother and I go camping alone together, including in the winter. And when I was 15, we took a 10-day long winter survival. No, it was a 3-week long winter survival course out in Vermont in the mountains. And we backpacked. We walked halfway across Michigan together when we were 15, and backpacked. So I was just, canoeing and hitchhiked all over the country when I got older, and just fell in love with backpacking and studied wilderness survival wherever I could. But finally, in 1994, I picked up a book called The Tracker. And I had been actually introduced to that book, but not read it. When I picked that book up, I was given that book by a friend about 5 years earlier, and I picked it up and I read the introduction and I put it down because I knew if I read it, my life was going to change. And I was pretty invested in what the arrangement I had, at that time. So I put it back down. Well, my life's circumstances changed. In 94, I picked it up and I read it. And I called up a guy who had been out to take some classes from the author, Tom Brown Jr., previously to me, and asked him about his experiences there. It was an ER doc named Pat Munson from Chelsea. And he suggested that I go ahead and take classes and asked if I'd call him when I got back. So I did. And my first standard class, which was in spring of 94, it was a 1-week long class. And I'll never forget, I went there thinking we were going to go out in the woods and live in survival. And it was held on a farm with a little teeny, not very big yard in back of it with a barn. And there was about 90 people there from all over the world. And then a muddy cornfield all the way around us, with the woods in the distance and the farmhouse. And we were to live in the barn, stay in the barn, or sleep out in the yard if we wanted to, and take a class. And I was really disillusioned. And I was laying on my back out in this grassy area, basically a lawn out in back of the barn, and kind of elbow to elbow with a lot of other people that had got there. It was on a Sunday. Everybody's tired and wiped out from getting there. Class is going to start the next day. And I was laying on my back looking up and just feeling like I don't belong here. This isn't what I expected. I should just go home. And I was watching a hawk flying around way, way up, a red-tailed hawk soaring around, clear blue sky, not a breath of wind, early April day. And I saw the hawk release something, and it started floating down. And I thought, I thought it maybe lost a feather, and it was floating down and down. The hawk had been way up there, and as it floated down further, it wasn't moving like a feather, it was moving like a leaf. And I realized it was a leaf. And I thought, wow, I must have grabbed it by mistake when I grabbed something else. I didn't know why. And I watched this leaf floating down, and it kept down, down, down. And, you know, I'm elbow to elbow with probably 50 other people laying down on my sleeping bag, looking up, and this leaf just comes floating down, 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 all the way down. And when it was about 20 feet above me, I realized it was going to land on me. And I was just blown away. And as it came down, right before it landed, I just laid my arm up like this with my palm open on the ground and landed right in my hand. And I looked at it, and it was a cottonwood leaf, and it had talon holes through it from the hawk's talons. And I knew enough to know that cottonwood was a very sacred tree that represented life to a lot of tribes in the Western, especially the Southwestern and Southwestern United States, because it always indicated water, and that the hawk was often regarded by many Native peoples as the messenger. And so that completely changed my attitude about the class, and about my life, and about assumption, and many, 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 many things. You know, I had read the tracker prior to going to take this class, and I remember reading that book and finishing it, and then taking a walk in the woods. And just from reading that book, the woods were a completely different place to me. My whole life I had stared at tracks and wondered about them. Spent hours looking at tracks, not knowing what they meant or anything. And when I got out and I started taking that class, this whole world opened up to me. And you know, all that time that I spent in the woods playing and looking at tracks and stuff, I found out later was, unbeknownst to me, dirt time. What Tom called dirt time, which is time you spend practicing. And even though I didn't know what I was doing, I had been beginning to build up a catalog of instinctual understanding of things. And so I stayed there for that week, and most of it was spent planted on our butts in chairs, not chairs, on benches, hard benches in a barn while he lectured, and then going out and practicing things, skills. And I learned more in that week than I'd learned in my whole life prior to it.
Okay.
And the skills that I learned were basically a synthesis of the basic survival skills that you need to survive, boiled down to their absolute essence. And you know, the most successful ones, like fire, you know, the method that we were taught for making fire, which is a bow drill, is commonly used around the world, and it's the most common. And the reason for that is because it works the most. It's the most successful. And the rest of the skills just fell right into place behind it: shelter building, water, food, and all the skills associated with it. And I had gone there expecting a class in wilderness survival, and that's not what it was. It was a class in awareness.
Okay.
And connection. So that's how I got involved, and that was my first class. And I went back time after time over the next 8 years. And when I got back from my first class, I called up Pat Munson, the doc that had asked me to call him when I got back. We ended up getting together and started practicing skills. If you read any of Tom's books, a lot of them, at least the autobiographical ones, you know, he's got this other kid named Rick that he does all these skills with, Stalking Wolf's grandson. And you need a partner when you do a lot of this stuff, because otherwise, you know, you just bullshit yourself. And Pat and I became tracking partners and survival partners, and we really got into it. We ended up opening up a school and teaching, and it was a wonderful time of my life. That whole period of time was probably the best 8-9 years of my life. So
Teaching.
Yeah, teaching and studying, and I still study. I teach only occasionally now, although I'm considering teaching more regularly. But if I do, that'll probably be in the spring, when he gets back from the Bahamas. We're both older now. He goes and spends the winters down where it's nice and warm on a boat. I'm up here in Michigan. So.
If you do, I'll add that in post to the
All right.
comment.
Okay, great.
I'd like to read something from page 5 of the tracker in the chapter, The Ultimate Track, which I thought to read previously, but I think it might tie in. I was fascinated with nature even before Stalking Wolf taught me to track, but my nature watching was limited by the necessity of sitting and waiting for a long time in a place where we hoped something might happen. Stalking Wolf gave me the tools to track the mystery to its source. He taught me how to teach myself. I've been using the tools he gave me ever since. Stalking Wolf was an Apache tracker. Did I say that right? He had come to New Jersey to be near his son, who was stationed there. His grandson, Rick, was my best friend, and Stalking Wolf taught both of us how we could teach ourselves to track, to stalk, to live in the woods, and to survive there. He gave us the questions that would lead us to our answers, but he never told us an answer. He taught me to see and to hear, to walk and to remain silent. He taught me how to be patient and resourceful, how to know and how to understand. He taught me to see invisible things from the trail that all action leaves around itself. He taught me how to teach myself the mystery of the track. So your experience is pretty similar to Tom's, I think, being in the classroom and fantasizing about what's out the window. But I had a question for you, which is revisiting this book. I'm remembering the chapter on good medicine and the chapter on omen. And it strikes me that I've been a little curious recently what an omen is, because it seems to be part of your experience of staying at that retreat or study that you went to. Was it experience like or akin to an omen?
That was a sign. Okay. It was an indication from in that case, from the physical world, I believe, that began and was born in the realm of spirit. But that was a sign, something like a signpost, like, hey, pay attention. There's a lot more here than you think. This has been delivered by the messenger, and what you're going to learn is sacred, and it's sacred to life. That's how I interpreted. One of the things Tom tells you when you first go to study with him is, if you believe everything I say, you're a goddamn fool. Your job is to try this stuff and prove me right or prove me wrong. And, so with what I learned from him, about an omen, how he defined an omen. An omen is something that happens out of context in an extreme way, something that typically would never happen. And most omens are associated with animals, different animals, like, yes, okay, there was an omen perhaps that I would, go on and learn from Tom, because the messenger was the hawk. So that hawk, in a way, was an omen, but that hawk wasn't doing anything unusual except dropping a leaf. And if it had missed an animal and just had a leaf on its talons and the wind had blown it off, it could have just been a happenstance. The part I chose to pay attention to was the fact that it landed right in my hand and I'd seen it drop it. So, we interpret different things that happen around us. We draw meaning from them. And it doesn't matter whether that hawk intentionally did that or was directed somehow to do it. What matters is what made the difference in my life.
Right.
And what made the difference in my life was making the decision to experience wonder the way I did as a child, and to believe in the larger realms of reality than I had limited myself to as I grew older. The sort of the technical omen description I remember him giving of if something's an omen is when an animal does something that's completely out of context. So, if you see an owl, you see an owl. But if the owl does something that it normally never does, then it's important to pay attention. Owl represents, in many cultures, transformation between the world of spirit and the world of the physical. Some think of it as death. And I have had experiences. I had one experience I can relate with an owl, where it did something completely out of context. I was walking out to go hunting on a farm I owned near a swamp, and I was going down a very thickly wooded lane that had grown into a tree I was going to climb and look out over the edge of a swamp. And just as I got there, there was a barred owl, fairly large owl, not as big as a great horned owl, but and it was on a tree, a fallen tree that had fallen across the trail, and it stayed until I got within about, I don't know, 10 feet of it. Now I was doing what Tom had taught me, which is fox walking, wide angle vision, camouflaging your. Pardon me?
Fox walk?
Fox walking. It's the way our feet are designed to walk, and we naturally walk. You walk this way if you're trying to walk across gravel in your bare feet. Wide angle vision is unfocused vision. It's where you're not focused on one thing. You're just taking in everything around it. The settlers used to refer to the natives, the heathens' ungodly stare. But anyway, I was proceeding to this spot I decided I was going to hunt, and this owl was on a fallen tree, and I got to within about 10 feet of it, and then it just took off and flew, I don't know, just another 10 feet to another tree. And then it came back to the tree it was on, went back and forth 4 times. So I said, and then it flew off. And I said, okay, well, this is definitely an omen. Let's make really sure I don't kill myself climbing this tree. Maybe I should watch myself the 4th step up. I don't really know, but I know that I need to pay attention to whatever this thing was telling me. Well, I got up the tree without killing myself, and I was hunting, and it wasn't too long before 4 bucks came. This is late season, and all 4 bucks came, and one at a time, and milled around right under me. And I didn't take any of them, but they all scattered after that. One of them finally winded me, and they all loped off again. But anyway, that was my one experience I had where an animal felt like an omen. Here I was out to hunt deer, and even though I decided in the end not to take them and didn't, 4 deer, 4 movements of an animal back and forth really close to me, and knew I was there, would never do something like that. So that was the definition that I had heard and used.
It's interesting. I've been thinking about it, some of these concepts in relation to some ideas in the Tibetan system, as far as I understand them, which is the idea that something is auspicious. But there's also an idea I've heard that I think it's a little tricky for some of us, which is that when a negative habit, any habit really, but a negative habit is starting to die off, it'll pop back up. And, that's when you'll get the text from your ex, and it'll be right at that time where you're like, oh, maybe it means something. And I guess, I don't know, but as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking that part of it is, does it broaden your vision? Because these auspicious things, these omens that have to do with our relationship with nature and the divine, are going to broaden our awareness. Texts from our ex don't really broaden our awareness. They
they can.
Yeah, they can. So yeah, I guess I'm just thinking about the meaning that we assign things, because there's a certain danger to that, and it seems like a lot of the tracking work is about learning how to teach yourself through the woods.
Well, and through the connection with spirit, the unseen and the eternal. Okay. Whether you can learn everything you need to learn about this in the woods, and you can learn it in the city too. Tom used the venue of woods and tracking because that's what Stalking Wolf told him, because Stalking was an Apache. I mean, Stalking Wolf was, born in the time of Geronimo and lived independent of white influence for the first 20 years of his life completely. And he spent his entire life never using any man-made contrivance, and lived as a scout and a shaman. So, that was his venue for learning and for practice. You know, in terms of getting a text from your ex and wondering what it means, you know, when you're out and you're moving through nature, and this is tracking, nothing happens in nature that doesn't affect everything else around it. Everything out in nature it's like a symphony. It's both the conductor. Every movement you make, you're the conductor, you're the musician, and you're also, if you're awake, the audience. And so what happens is, if you go walking out clumsily into a wilderness area, you send out these waves of movement, these concentric rings of your movement, and animals start to dive for cover and warn each other that there's a human coming, and it'll go for miles. And the further away it gets, the more subtle it is, and the closer it is, more intense it is. It's just like throwing a rock in a pond. Well, the world of spirit is not separate from the world of physical. It surrounds and imbues the world of the physical. So if you're thinking about someone, or someone's thinking about you, and you have an intense emotional experience going on because you've broken up with somebody, or you're listening to a song that you both listen to, or whatever the heck it is, you send out a spiritual concentric ring of a concentrated focus of an event or a person or an experience or an emotion. And if someone else out there is sensitive in that moment, it's usually a moment of non-thought and a blind stare, they may think of you, and they may be compelled then to use their logical linear mind to do something in response to that trigger, or may not. You know, the world of spirit is not constrained by the physical world's limits. It's not constrained by physical constraint or time. It's timeless and it's formless. And so it doesn't play by the same rules, but it's still real, and it's both affected by and affects the world of the physical. So just because we can't see it doesn't mean it isn't there. Just because I didn't know how to see which of those, you know, just because I didn't know how to understand what a track meant, and then look up into a tree and see where the squirrel leapt from the ground and caught the tree to climb up and left claw marks in that area, or, you know, just because I couldn't see that before I learned how to track didn't mean it didn't happen.
So yeah, there's a story early in the book where they don't even see Stalking Wolf. Like, they don't even know how he knew that the owl was there or the bird was there, because they're like, he didn't even look up, but he was able to put it together. In the book, it also talks about intermittent awareness. Is that relevant to this idea of the symphony of the outside?
I'm not sure what reference you're talking to with intermittent awareness. Most of my time is spent in intermittent awareness, where, you know, I'm distracted, I'm focused on what's right in front of me, I'm thinking about what I got to do today and run errands, you know, and then I remember there's a larger context in which I live, and if I choose to open myself to that context, then, you know, my life goes from black and white to technicolor again. And, you know, one of the things I learned from Tom, and he teaches all of his students, is to exist in a moving, dynamic, meditative state where your brain waves aren't in beta all the time anymore, they're in alpha. And, you know, intermittent awareness that I experience has to do with, am I focused on something and thinking, or am I open and receptive to what really is going on? You know, the more highly aware you become, the more the lines between the world of the more the divisions between the world of the experience, between experiencing the world of the physical and the world of the spirit fade, and the more transparent they become.
So yeah.
Well, and so there's a shifting back and forth.
What is you mentioned alpha waves? What would that be?
Alpha, brainwaves, where there's your, this is just scientific, modern science stuff. When they measure the length of brain waves, there's 4 basic categories they put them into. And there's the beta brainwave, which is where most people exist. They we're walking around, we're looking at the dog running, and we're thinking about, I got to balance my checkbook when I get home, and all that kind of stuff. Go to the grocery store. It's the place most people live most of the time in their heads while they're awake. Then there's alpha, and that's a more relaxed state. And to know what alpha is kind of like you've been just sitting outside. You've been like, you go camping and you've been out for a couple of days, you're not thinking all the time anymore. All of a sudden, you just sort of catch yourself in a blind stare, and you're not thinking anything. And you can do it just sitting in a chair too, looking at a wall or anything. And so it's a state of being awake without thinking, that's relaxed and calm. Beta or theta is you get more relaxed and highly aware, potentially highly aware brain state where your brain waves are. And that's the kind of the state you're in where you're drifting off to sleep. And most people can remember when they were kids and their parents were talking and they were starting to fall asleep. They could hear the murmur of the voices, but they weren't making sense. And they weren't really registering what they meant. And that's that sort of relaxed, falling to sleep, just to sleep brainwave state. And you can be in that state of awareness also and be awake and walking around with practice. And then there's delta. And delta is deep, deep sleep state. It's the deepest sleep state we go into. And it's the one that if we don't go into regularly enough, we get squirrely. And, that's also attainable through deep meditative practices and conscious living. And some people are able to exist in that state and be awake and have a conversation with you at the same time. When you're in those deeper states, you're much more receptive and open to what's around you, because what closes us off from being able to see the owl, like Stalking Wolf could when the kids couldn't yet, is the language. It's the what keeps us from doing that is the static of the the beta and even alpha brainwave states where you're not receptive. And so your brain is so busy categorizing, defining things that it can't that you can't be aware of things because you're blinding yourself. If you say, okay, I know what an oak tree is. There's an oak. I know how to identify. You don't know anything about that tree other than what it's called.
Yeah. So this here we have the expression, you can't see the forest for the trees.
Well, that's my interpretation of that is a bit different, but yes, it's actually what you're saying in the context of this conversation, as I think of it, makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah, that's actually very accurate upon thought. You're not confused by short-term, immediate signals. You're able to see further in time, further in space, further in meaning and connection.
Is that the goal, so to speak, of tracking? I mean, you're looking for the animal, but it seems like in this book, it seems like there is a goal in terms of consciousness, and then there's sort of an implied spirituality to all this. But it isn't outright saying, this is a spiritual school. It seems to be something that can have those realized through it. Would you say anything about that? I mean, is my question making sense?
Well, I mean, kind of what I hear you asking me is tracking is tracking a spiritual exercise? Is it so that you can gain? Well, now I'm really kind of, I guess I did sort of lose the question, but where my
it seems like Stalking Wolf seems to have some sort of realization, and he is using tracking to transmit that.
Oh, that's very true. I mean,
Okay.
Tom teaches the venue of tracking, and in a way, it's almost camouflage.
Yeah.
But it's a tool. He uses the tool of tracking to teach people about the greater realms beyond the world of the flesh, and to be able to go to be aware of, communicate with, and benefit from the world of the eternal. The unseen and the eternal is what he called it. And, you know, tracking can be used very simply on a straight physical level to get food. I mean, look at this show alone that people go out, you know, they set traps and different things. And most of them are, you know, most of them are starving to death. At least what I've seen, they're all starving to death by the time they leave, because for one, they don't know how to track animals, which they need. At least I only watched part of one season, but these people are, you know, they're in the fall and it's getting cold, and you got to eat meat in the fall. I don't care if you're a vegetarian or not. If it's cold and snowing, you're not going to make it long term. And, you know, had they had tracking experience, they'd be able to find out what trails animals were going down, what time, what kind, what other animals were there, what they were aware of, what they were not aware of, where they, you know, and set the traps accordingly. Why take the time to set a snare on a trail where nothing's been down it for 2 weeks? You know, if on the other hand, you can age tracks when you learn to track, you know that it's there every morning, then guess what? You know, it's got a much better chance. So, you know, on a straight physical level, yeah, tracking's a good idea. I mean, people track all the time. Your dog goes running off down the beach. You're taking a walk on the beach, you can't find it, but you don't even think about it. You're following its tracks. You know, the question is, can you do that through leaves? Can you do it through pine needles? Can you do it over rock? You know, and so there's the straight physical part of it, but then there's spirit tracking. And spirit tracking is using the energy that's left in the track, which is a spiritual, but also an intermediate of force level energy, to connect with and track an animal. And Tom teaches you how to do that. And there's blindfold tracking. Like you track blindfolded, and you're feeling the energy in the track. And I've literally warmed my hands over tracks in the winter because I get a sensation of heat from tracks. So, you know, you can take it to that realm. And when you go in from the realm of physical and shift into the world of spirit tracking, it's a whole new and different experience. And it takes you further of following an animal. When you get to a point of physical tracking where you can't go on, and you hit what's called a wall and you can't find the next track, if you shift to spirit tracking, then you often find the next track. But you can also get to the point in spirit tracking where you can't find the next track, and you shift back to the physical. And I think probably this intermittent awareness that you're referring to is that type of an experience where you're shifting back and forth.
So it must be interesting in a school of that nature, I imagine, because you have some people who are there because they want to track. And you are some people who are there because they see this spiritual dimension to it. And some people who, it seems like your story is that both elements were of significant and almost undifferentiated interest to you.
You literally can't separate them. And my experience, in large part, illustrates the experience I saw most people have, which is, you know, you go out there, you go there expecting to learn physical survival, but then a freaking hawk drops a leaf in your hand. You know, you begin to have understandings and awarenesses of things that you didn't before. And you begin to see there's a larger context in which you exist and all things exist, and that all things affect and are affected by all other things. And so you begin to interpret your experience in physicality as part of a dance instead of a solo gig, you know, part of a symphony instead of a solo. And when that happens, there's a shift. Even if you are, you know, limited to perception of a physical plane, that perception begins to open up. And, there's a richness that happens. Like I said earlier, things kind of go from feeling like black and white to Technicolor. And it's like in the Wizard of Oz, when the house lands in the land of Oz, all of a sudden it's black and white at Kansas on the farm, but now you're in Technicolor. And it's a discipline that takes a lot of work and a lot of practice. If you just go at it with I'll try this for a day or two, you might have a nice experience, but it's not going to make any real big changes in your life generally. But it's a question of, it's like anything else, however willing I am to let go of my preconceived notions is exactly how much more information I'm going to be able to get, because I'm not going to blind it with my preconceived notions. It's literally like you're trying to talk to me, but I'm up here talking like this really loud and I can't hear a word you're saying. I start to calm my voice down a little bit, and then I begin to hear what you're saying. And then if I just shut up, I can hear every word you're saying. Doesn't mean I'm understanding it. Because if I'm thinking about something different while you're talking, then I'm still not really hearing you. And the trick is to get this to shut up. And that's what meditation is all about. One of the things Tom taught us early on, and I've taught early on, is that, you spend every morning and every evening when you get up and you go to bed in prayer and meditation, and you're in this discipline. And I've had periods of my life where I've done it, periods where I haven't. But, prayer is asking and meditation is listening. And it sets up an intention to have a different kind of life when you do that. And then you become more receptive to that concentric movement that's coming towards you of someone's emotion who you dated years ago. And now, and so you're more receptive to that type of thing. And if you get good enough at it, then you can have direct communication. But that takes an awful lot of practice.
I'm still learning, and it's a good exercise for me to do while I have this, while I'm doing these interviews with people, is learning how to do it just in conversation, as you're using it metaphorically. But instead of coming at it with, 19 different irrelevant associations that make me sound smart, and to actually have some sort of reciprocity. And for me, I'm active listening for that, I think.
Well, the associations are never irrelevant. The question is, are they useful? And are there so many of them that they blind you to what is useful? Or do you attach to one so significantly you can't see the other one? And it's just part of being human. It's part of being incarnating into physicality. When we incarnate into physicality, we have to basically agree to put on blinders. There's no point. If you're going to have a temporal experience and you're going to be limited by the laws of time and place, then your body and your mind basically is designed to be able to do both, but you have to relearn the vision beyond the straight physical. When we're little babies and little kids, we still see the spirit and God and everything, but our brain begins to learn to categorize and put into different specific spots what's dangerous, what's not, what's comfortable, what's not, what tastes good, what isn't, what's warm, what's cold, all of these things. So we don't have to go through having that experience again every time, and it can become automatic. Otherwise, we just couldn't physically survive. So when we're that young, all the different parts of the brain can talk to all the other different parts of the brain. But as we get older, we kind of develop this control tower, like in an airport. If you're going to land on that runway, you're going to land on that way. Sight, you're over there. Hearing, you're over here. One of the things that meditation does, and deep meditation, is it starts to quiet. It actually limits the blood flow to the part of the brain that's the control center, and starts to mute its message and its censorship. And then hearing begins to have a conversation with sight, and begins to have a conversation with smell and touch, and taste, and all those things. They start to be able to be experienced at the same time as being parts of the same thing.
Are there specific meditations and prayers that you have in this tradition from the Apaches, or?
No, I don't. No, that's not what I was taught.
Yeah.
What Stalking Wolf taught, he taught an awful lot of stuff to Tom that was from the Apaches, but he was more interested in synthesizing what he had learned. He traveled, Stalking Wolf traveled his whole life. He wandered for 60 years and down into Argentina, up into Mexico, from coast to coast. And his goal was his vision really was to gather the physical and spiritual skills of the remaining indigenous peoples, find out what their common points were, and then concentrate on developing those and teaching those to modern man. And that's what he did. So a lot of what you learn is a synthesis. And in fact, the meditation that Tom teaches, and it's in his book, Awakening Spirits, he calls it a long form meditation. Yeah, that one. Involves a number of disciplines that Stalking Wolf learned from a Zen Buddhist. I think the guy's name was Za, but I don't remember anymore. And actually the elements of it are quite familiar to a lot of other, are similar or identical to a lot of other methods that are used in meditation. Basically almost all meditations that I've ever heard of, at least begin with some sort of a repetitive, paying attention to some repetitive thing over and over again until your brain shuts up, because it's your logical linear mind that won't stop thinking, and your ego that wants to be in control and in charge at all times. That basically creates so much loud static you can't hear the voice of spirit coming through. You can't hear your instinct, you don't know what it means, and you can't even hear it. So quieting the physical mind, the most common, all religions have it. One thing all religions have in common is some kind of a repetitive practice, whether it's rosary beads, chanting, dancing, drumming. It doesn't, saying it just doesn't matter. Gongs, it still gets the mind to quiet. One of the things Tom uses when you go to take his classes from him is he gives you like carving projects. So you're over and over again, you're taking a little flake off of something. And at the same time, he's stressed you out and told you got to get all this stuff done, or you're going to end up sleeping in your skivvies in the woods that night, and you can't possibly get it all done. And the mind just blows up and gives up. And then you can start to get a greater awareness of what's happening.
So I'm thinking back to what you said about dirt time.
Yeah.
Because it seems like the thing that was stressed was prayer and meditation, not this specific practice, but that you're getting, what I'm learning from you is that dirt time is basically time at practice of something. Is that correct?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And the skills that he teaches, whether they're, physical, spiritual, or both, the more frequently you do them, the more automatic they become, and the better you get at it. It's like push-ups, or spelling. It's repetition. Wax on, wax off.
Well,
so
spelling is what I'll ask you about, because Tom wrote his first book with someone else. You mentioned because he didn't feel entirely ready to do it on his lonesome. I believe you said something to that effect. And then the other ones he'd written his own.
Well, I don't. My understanding is that he had help writing a number of his books, but his first one, certainly, I believe that's true. And he became a better writer over the years.
Well, was that part of you write yourself? And I was wondering if there was no element of apprenticeship in that.
My writing?
Yeah. With Tom Brown Jr. or?
Oh, no, I've never, I mean, in terms of when I write, no, my write, no, I was forced to write in school. You had to, in English, you had to write stories. So I wrote stories. But the things I've been writing lately has actually been political discourse between some guys I went to high school with and myself. And we have differing views, and we can discuss them. We still get together regularly every year up in Pigeon River State Forest. We have for 50 years. And despite some of their what I regard as to rather, naive and misguided principles, we love each other. And so we have discussions about it, and they feel the same way about me.
The story you shared with me personally about how you came to realize the bond that you still had with them was very touching to me.
Yeah, I had to recognize my own prejudices that had estranged me from them, own them, admit them, and ask for their help in overcoming them, and tell them that I wanted to move our relationship to a deeper level. And they all stepped up.
I think the part that registered with me is where we talked about how sometimes the fears and insecurities can come from thinking that it's the other person putting them on us. And I shared with Muji, if I quote it correct, people just want you to be so they can be them.
Yeah.
And I find myself pretty adamant before I even realize that they're mad at me about something sometimes.
But what you just said is people want you to be you so they can be them.
That's right.
Yeah, that's just phenomenally wise. I mean, think about the relationships we had as little kids, uncensored, unguarded, letting it all hang out. When my brother died, a bunch of friends came to his memorial, and 4 of them were from grade school. And after 10 minutes with these guys, we were back in grade school again.
Yeah.
There was that sense of freedom with them.
Yeah.
It was wonderful. Those guys I've known from high school, there's a great sense of freedom with them as well, because we met in high school and we got together and spent time together because we wanted to, not because we had to for work, or it was easier because we had families or anything else. And so, our relationship, by the way we relate to each other, does pretty quickly revert back to cutting up, having fun.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm finding it to be a very vulnerable thing to state my opinion, and to realize that other people. One thing I guess I learned from that quote that I shared is that I'm trying to say my opinion. I would like to do it not to assert my view, but to welcome a view, as in, this is my vote. What do you think? Right? Which is back to what. Is there a point where we shut up and listen? Does that happen?
Well, asking a question is a great way to shut up and listen. Because then the other person's got the floor and they know you're interested, or at least you're pretending to be.
Well, I've got to pretend to be listening.
Go ahead.
So we talked about tracking as a specific practice. We talked about the morning and evening prayer meditation. And your writing is something you pursued independently of Tom Brown Jr. What is, I'm thinking about it. I'll admittedly say that I'm thinking about this in context of reading the Don Juan books. In Tom Brown Jr.'s system, it seems like there's tracking and there's stalking. In Don Juan, if I remember correctly, there's stalking and there's dreaming. I'm not sure that they're the same stalking, because we might be dealing with different traditions. We might not. But I guess what I'm wondering is they talk at some point about in Don Juan about you can even stalk your habits. So I'm curious about A, things of that nature, and B, or if it's the same topic, what is the through line? You're not spending all your day stalking. So what, is this something that is brought through your life, or that your life is brought through? And how does that operate?
Stalking is different than tracking, and yet it's the same. It requires tracking. Stalking is basically approaching some entity, with that entity being unaware that you're approaching it. so that it doesn't change its behavior. Typically if you stalk up on an animal, you get close enough so you can, eat it. Like a heron stalking frogs in a pond. That's, the body form of the great blue heron was what taught many native peoples to stalk. This, the whole movement, the posture, all of that. But tracking really is tracking. The tracking is asking what Stalking Wolf called the sacred question, which is what happened here. And as I've grown older, okay, and lost my physical stamina and to be able to do a lot of the things I used to be able to do, I stalk myself. And I stalk my behaviors and my motivations, so they don't flee before me. And I'm getting better at setting traps. My wife's great at setting the traps for me. And relationship is very good for that, because we become aware of something that we're doing that we're not aware of, that is not helping us either head towards or stay in balance. And when we do that, we then have a choice to make a habit out of paying attention to whatever that incident was. Kind of like a cue when it's your turn to say a line in a play. Instead of saying what you always say, let's try something different, often it's saying nothing. But we're stalking ourselves and our behaviors when we do that. And now, as I age, I find that the freedom that comes from that self-awareness that occurs when I stalk myself is very valuable.
So you talk about setting traps. That might be a little point of departure too from the Don Juan, aside from the endless drug visions.
I'm not real familiar with Don Juan. Lots of people read it. I believe I did read it, but it was so long ago.
Oh yeah.
I remember very little of it. It's just, I know that when I took classes I remember reading Don Juan and wishing you could learn how to do this stuff.
Yeah.
And then I remember going out and taking classes from Tom and saying, wow, he actually teaches you how to do this stuff. And there's a very simple stepwise method to it. It's not magic. And anybody who does these things can learn these skills,
So when you talk about setting traps for yourself or your wife setting traps, so do you find that your own trails are you able to catch yourself? Because oftentimes when we try to change our habits, like 7 new ones show up and etc. How long, I guess what I'm curious about, there's one specific thing that I'm mentioning from the Don Juan books, which is that the idea that when you stalk yourself, you may not be able to intervene. You may just have to witness yourself for some period, but you're finding that you also are able to intervene, and having a relationship is part of that too. But often does the trail go off in another direction, and then you got to start from square one?
I mean, when we look back on things, let's say we have a regret, something we did that we regret. Well, that's tracking what happened. Okay. Then knowing how to track in that way, knowing what that feeling was like and what created those feelings. If we find we're having those feelings again, then we can look to the same behavior, that being the track that we're doing now, that are creating the same feelings, or something we're anticipating doing. And it's in the anticipatory place that I get the most efficacy out of searching for and finding balance, because I haven't already stepped in the trap. A trap is basically being caught by surprise by a behavior, is what we're talking about.
Well, it's very interesting, because we're talking about political discourse earlier, and I guess you were able to look at the conflict with other people and say what happened here, and to assess it. And I was
able to recognize that if I limited myself to the scope of information that they limited themselves to, I'd feel exactly the same way.
Which is part of tracking.
Right. Exactly. So them tracking their motivations, their views on politics and other things, the world, how things work.
This might be particularly relevant to me right now because I'm watching some of my behaviors that are old behaviors, and my friend always tells me, if you're still doing it, it's not an old behavior.
I love that. It's good. I'm gonna remember that one.
Hopefully the recording came through. But I can tell that there's a longer trail, right? And so I'm watching myself be reactive with people because assuming that what you're talking about is really good with some of this interpersonal stuff, which is what happened here.
Yeah.
And to look, I guess it's an interesting, I don't know if we're saying a metaphor here, to think about the trail of this not being my only interaction. Some of these are childhood interactions that I'm having, but I'm here in the present. And then there's I don't know what you call the anticipatory part of the trail, but just where I guess catching then, or the trap is the intervening in the process.
What is intervening in the process?
Well, that's what I'm wondering. Because I'm watching myself, the behavior.
Well, okay, I see what you're saying. Sure, you're going down a river and you see some rapids up ahead. You don't know if they're navigable or not. The last time you went over them without knowing they were navigable, you flipped over and you got wet. So what are you going to do this time? And maybe it might be a good idea to pull out on the shore, get your boat out of the water where it's not going to float away, and walk along the shore and see whether you think you can get through those rapids without getting wet again. I mean, it's basically as simple as that. The question is, do you hear those rapids in time? And even when you do, are you willing to go through the inconvenience of getting out of this nice moving craft?
I think of, there's a story in a Chinua Achebe book. The dog is on the porch and there's nails sticking out of it. It's an old porch. And they say, well, why doesn't the dog get off the nail? And they say, because it's not hurting him enough.
Right. That's life. That's how we learn. That's why we have nerve endings. We have nerve endings in here and we have nerve endings up here.
Yeah. So how much you need? So there's one more thing I wanted to get out of you, and I didn't find a way to tie it in, so I'll just directly ask for it.
Okay.
Which is the story of the demon with the hair.
Mm-hmm. I alluded to that earlier. I don't know which of his books that's in, but
you alluded to it in this conversation.
Pardon me?
You alluded to it in this conversation.
Yeah, earlier. It's what all religions have in common is some repetitive practice, some repetition of some kind that you pay attention to, so your mind gets bored and lets go of trying to control you. One of the most common, I think, and I can't say I'm not an authority, but in my experience, when I've studied all different kinds of meditations, they all have breathing. At some point, there's some level of concentration on or awareness of one's breathing. And in the long form meditation that Stalking Wolf developed and taught Tom, breathing was a big part of it. And in fact, he's got this thing called the breath to heart, which is a trigger mechanism. And you do this type of breath repetitively, periodically throughout this long form meditation, so that once you've meditated enough and your brain has been used to being in this brainwave state enough with this breath happening periodically, when you're not in that brainwave state, you can take a single breath and let it go, and it will immediately transform your brainwave state back down into alpha, theta, delta, wherever it needs to be to accomplish whatever it is you're going to accomplish. If you're going to accomplish spiritual change that will have register on the physical plane, you have got to be in pretty much in a delta brainwave state to do that. Otherwise, there's not a connection, and it's not a powerful connection, and there's not enough energy going on. So, if you're needing to know if there's like Tom had a pack of dogs chasing him, right? It's going to eat him, and you need to know where the nearest tree is. to climb and you can't see it that's going to serve, you need to know where to go without knowing how you know. And you have that question in your heart already because you're in danger. And you take that single breath and let it go, and you know exactly where to go, and that's where you go. That's listen to your instinct.
So would you be so kind as to relate to us the story?
Oh, the story of the hare?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. All right. Well, this is the way he told it, as best as I can remember. You're talking 20 years ago now. I may have read it again 5 years ago, but it's been a while. So there is a man who lives out in wilderness in a wonderful little shelter he's built, little Hogan, and you know, he has such a idyllic life. He loves it. He gets every day he gets up and, you know, he goes out and he wanders around amongst all of the animals and has conversations with them, and you know, finds out where he can get the ripest berries and where there's a warm spring today and that kind of thing, you know. And he really he's connected to all things, and he feels loved and he feels safe and happy. And one day he's adventuring, walking through an area of the woods that he hasn't been through in a while, and he sees a stump in a clearing, and leaning up against a stump is a sorcerer, and the sorcerer is asleep. And so he sneaks up on this sorcerer because he's heard if you can capture a sorcerer, he's got to grant you a wish. So he sneaks up on the sorcerer, and of course he takes the rope out of his pocket that everybody carried back in those days, right? And he quickly ties the sorcerer up, and then he wakes him up. And the sorcerer is outraged, you know, untie me at once, or I'll turn you into a whatever, right? And no, I know the rules. You've got to grant me a wish. If I release you, you got to grant me a wish. All right, I'll grant you your wish. Release me. And so he releases the sorcerer, and the sorcerer says, all right, what is your wish? And the guy says, well, I got to do a lot of pretty tedious, repetitive tasks living this close to the earth that aren't that much fun anymore. And I'd like you to, you know, grant me a being to do those tasks, you know. The things that I got to think about over and over again. I'm tired of it. And the sorcerer says, all right, I'll grant you this being. It'll be a little demon, but I'm going to warn you, you better keep this demon busy all the time, because if you don't, it's going to get bigger and bigger, and it's going to eat you alive. And the guy says, whoa, okay. So he says, I'll take that demon. And the sorcerer says, okay, fine, poof, and he disappears. And the guy looks around, and there's no demon, there's no little critter or anything. He's walking home thinking, man, I got ripped off, you know. Puts his rope back in his pocket, he's walking on. All of a sudden, poof, next to him, this ugly little creature appears. And the creature looks at him and says, master, give me something to do. And he says, well, walk home with me. So the thing walks home with him. And he gets home and he's tired. So he decides he's going to take a nap, and he lays down to take a nap. And the demon's right by his bed, a little bit bigger this time, and says, master, give me something to do. And he's like, oh, okay, well, go clean out my barn. So the demon goes to clean out the barn. The guy starts to go to sleep. He's just drifting off to sleep, and all of a sudden the demon's back. He says, master, it is done. Give me something to do. And he couldn't have done it that quick. I just started to fall asleep. He goes out. Sure enough, it's not only raked out, it's washed and clean. Give me something to do. He goes, well, all right. This barn's pretty old. Build me a new one. And he goes back into his house, and he's not in there 5 minutes. Bing, this thing appears again, even bigger. And it says, master, give me something to do. And he looks out his window, and he's got a brand new barn built. He's like, oh my God, you know. And it's just, and this thing is now, it's this high, and it's, you know, got sharp teeth, and it's drooling, and it's loud and strong looking. And this guy freaks out, you know, and he jumps out his window. He goes running through the woods, and this demon's coming after him. And as it's chasing him, it's getting bigger and bigger and bellowing like thunder. Master, give me something to do, knocking down trees, and the earth is shaking. And this guy runs around the corner and smack into a shaman, falls down. And he looks up at this shaman and he says, grandfather, please help me. You got to help me. I got this demon who's after me. and he's going to eat me alive. You know, I can't keep him busy. The shaman looks at him and reaches up, pulls a little hair out of his head, a little curly hair, ding, and hands it to the guy. Take this. And the guy takes it. He looks at it and he says, what am I going to do with this? He says, tell your demon to straighten the hair. You don't understand, man. This demon can build barns and everything. And now he's knocking down trees. I can't believe you can't hear him coming. And the shaman says, just have him straighten the hair, and disappears. And the demon breaks into the clearing and looks down through the trees and he yells, Master, give me something to do. And the guy gives him the hair. And the demon takes the hair and the guy says, straighten it. And so the demon takes the hair and pulls it out and then lets go. And it curls back up. And he grabs it and he straightens it out, runs his fingers out and lets go, and it curls back up. And every time this happens, he shrinks a little bit. And he just keeps doing this until he's about 2 feet high. And the guy says, give me my hair back. And the demon gives him his hair back. And he says, carry me home. And the demon carries him home. He says, put me in bed. The demon puts him in bed. And he says, I'm going to get some sleep here. And he hands him the hair. And he says, straighten the hair until I awake. So the moral of that story, or however you want to think of it, is the hair is the demon is the physical mind. It's the ego. It's the thinking mind. It's what the mind does when it's in beta brainwave state. And in order to perceive existence, worlds, experiences beyond this one that we perceive while we're in that brainwave state, we need to quiet it. And that's what meditation does. And that's what all religions of the earth have, some hair, some repetitive practice. As I said, chants, gongs, peace pipe, rosary beads, doesn't matter, dancing, something that you do over and over and over again until you quit thinking and your mind shuts up. And then you can begin to have physiologically go into these brainwave states that are more, allow us to be more receptive to realities beyond those we can see when we're in a more heightened brainwave state. So that's the hair. The hair is what it is common to all religions. They all have hairs, things you do over and over again.
I don't think there's anything to say after that.
Okay.
Unless you have to put out there.
All right.
Andy Beezer, it's been a pleasure. If you are sharing public information about training with you, I will put that in the video links. And if not, maybe we'll get you on again for the search at some point. We'll see.
All right. Sounds good.
Thank you so much,
kid. All
Great
right.
to see you.